and I think you've written a little bit about it, as the Americans start to learn from the British Raj about how to run a colonial empire that is possibly global in its scope, what are some of the emerging thoughts around the justifications or the language to be used to justify that expansionist colonial empire tendencies?
Yeah, and I just want to pause on what you said because it's absolutely correct. From our perspective, empire, like slavery, is just one of those abject past practices. And, we can hardly believe that people thought this was okay. Although, side note, there are still colonies in the world. The United States has 5 of them. I mean, it's not over, but we'll get to that. But we just kind of, read this stuff from like the 19th century and we're just like, are you serious? Like they believe this? But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not just that empire was a thing that happened. It was that empire was a thing that imperialists were proud of and bragged about, right? And didn't have a sort of, this wasn't like, oh, we got to tell some story to get away with this awful thing we're doing. There were people who were truly bought into the project, and generally the thing that they were, by the 19th century and early 20th century that they were most excited about was civilization. That civilization was a good thing. Civilized countries were better off, that civilization should spread throughout the world, and that empire was the mechanism, or the main mechanism by which less civilized people could, through proximity to the more civilized, learn to have better lives. It's distressingly a little similar to economic development talk sometimes. So, so like you can kind of see where it goes. But yeah, and so the British had been totally transparent about, there's a hierarchical world. The British are on top. That's as it should be, because they're people who are less civilized, and we need to sort of bring them along. And it's that language that people in the United States really started taking up. I mean, there have been kind of flashes of it before, but that became the dominant language for thinking about what to do in the Philippines.
That's right. I have this interesting quote from, I believe, a book that Alfred McCoy had written about the U.S. Empire.
Oh, which book? He's written a bunch, and they're terrific. That's
right. So I'll tell you which one this is from. This is from In the Shadows of the American Century.
Oh, yeah.
U.S. Global Power. So he writes, right? I'm going to use this. So he says that the U.S. developed this distinct form of global governance, incorporating aspects of antecedent empires, ancient and modern, to form their own version of a new, unique American empire. And then he quotes, and now I quote him, "This unique U.S. imperium was Athenian in its ability to forge coalitions amongst allies, Roman in its reliance on legions that occupied military bases across most of the known world," this you've written about, and British in its aspiration to merge culture, commerce, and alliances into a comprehensive system that covered the globe.
Yeah. Right? So that's wonderful. Al McCoy is such a terrific writer. I guess that is about a slightly later period. And so I've been gassing on about the U.S. colonial empire in its heyday, which is the first half of the 20th century. That's when the United States has most people in colonies. And the big question, I think the big connection between my work and yours is what happens next, what happens after World War II, where the United States promotes 2 of its large colonies, Hawaii and Alaska, to states. It lets its largest colony, the Philippines, go. It still has Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and then later the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. But nevertheless, it doesn't have the kind of extensive colonial empire that it looked like it was that it had previously, and that it might have even had a larger one if it had wanted to. And so then the question is like, what do we call the United States after World War II? Is it still an empire? It's clearly enormously powerful, but is that an imperial form of power? And McCoy's of the vision or of the belief, yes. And so he's like, look, I mean, they just like incredibly, powerful world gobbling empire, and they don't always call it that, but it's totally Roman and it's totally British, and I can see why.
No, that's right. And 2 things come to mind, right? And I've written a little bit about this in the chapter where I talk about the colonial great game, the great colonial game.
Yeah.
The British, as they're trying to figure out how to run this massive empire that they have, right, that they built, they also had 2 ways of doing it. right? Most people tend to think that the British controlled every territory very directly.
Yeah.
That's what we think of the British colonial empire. But they also had this way of indirect control, where they were not in power. So even in India, some of the historians in India recently have written about this, that 40% of the British empire that is considered India, British India, 40% of it, or 60%, one of the two, was actually not under British control directly.
The princely states,
There's the princely states, where the princely states continue to retain certain levels of autonomy. Right? And to me, as I think about the American empire, so to say, there's a lot of that indirect control that they, I believe, in that post-World War II era, that America starts to exercise.
Yeah. So there's two things.
Not the direct control, right? So one of the lessons, in a way, that beyond that Rudyard Kipling note that was written to Roosevelt, as you rightly pointed out, is this idea that you don't have to directly control. Of course, the timing also matters, right? I think you've also written about this, that as the American empire comes into its own fully around World War II, where it now has the independence to exert itself also, it coincides with a massive anti-colonial movement globally.
Yeah.
Right? And so now, I imagine if I put myself into that era, you can't now suddenly say, hey, listen, I've been this anti-colonial country where I've been telling the British that, no, this is not good, you can't do this in the US, you can't do this in the world. I can't suddenly turn around and become one like that myself. So it almost seems obvious to me that the notion of empire in the US in the post-World War II era had to be that of indirect control, had to be that of less direct political control, but more economic, cultural control. Right? Which is something you've also referred to in your article, the one we can't get into. So to me, it almost seems that controlling physical territory is a no-no, but then everything else is okay. That's the context in which the US now has to, in that post-World War II era, think about it.